Marcus Kane had learned to be resourceful during his years in Black Ops missions across Eastern Europe. Every safe house, every weapon cache, every escape route had to be memorized with photographic precision. He didn't tolerate chaos in his personal space. Everything had to be precise and organized. Order was survival. His apartment reflected this militant discipline. Books aligned at perfect angles, weapons cleaned and stored in designated positions. Emergency supplies rotated monthly according to expiration dates. The habits of warfare had become the rituals of civilian life, though Marcus often wondered if he could ever truly be civilian again. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Prague safe house as Marcus checked his equipment one final time. His tactical vest was secure, magazines loaded, radio frequencies verified. Around him, his elite team moved with the same methodical precision that had kept them alive through 17 successful operations across 3 continents. There was Johnson, the demolitions expert whose steady hands could defuse a bomb or plant one with equal skill. Martinez specialized in electronic surveillance and could hack into any system given enough time. Thompson handled communications and had never failed to establish contact when they needed extraction. And then there was Chen, their medic and close-quarters combat specialist, whose quick thinking had saved all their lives more than once. The story begins with Marcus Kane, a highly skilled operative and former Special Forces commander, completing what would be his final authorized mission alongside his elite tactical team. They had successfully infiltrated and neutralized a terrorist cell in Prague, but upon their return, disturbing news awaited them. The operation they had just completed was discovered to be completely unauthorized by their superiors. This revelation sent shockwaves through the team, and as a direct consequence, they were all immediately discharged from active duty. Marcus stared at the discharge papers in disbelief. 23 years of service, countless successful missions, commendations from generals he'd never met, and it all ended with a single signature on official letterhead. The bureaucrat across the desk avoided eye contact, shuffling through forms with practiced indifference. The operation exceeded authorized parameters, he repeated mechanically. Command structure was compromised. Intel was fabricated. The entire cell was a setup by rival agencies. The words echoed in Marcus's mind as he walked through the empty corridors of the military complex. His security clearance had been revoked immediately. His access cards no longer worked. Even his parking space had been reassigned. It was as if 23 years of his life had been erased with the efficiency of a computer delete command. With no mission parameters to follow and no chain of command to report to, the team members dispersed to their respective civilian lives. Marcus, now unemployed and without purpose, decided to return to his hometown of Phoenix to rest and contemplate his uncertain future. The transition from elite operative to civilian was jarring, leaving him feeling displaced and restless. The flight to Phoenix stretched endlessly before him, passengers chatting about mundane concerns that seemed impossibly trivial after years of life or death decisions. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to imagine what normal life looked like, but the images wouldn't come. Phoenix greeted him with its familiar blend of desert heat and urban sprawl. The city had grown during his absence, new shopping centers and housing developments spreading across the landscape like concrete tumbleweeds. But the mountains remained unchanged, standing sentinel over the valley with the same steadfast presence he remembered from childhood. Marcus rented a modest apartment downtown, furnished it with military precision, and tried to establish routines that didn't involve mission briefings or tactical planning. Sleep came irregularly. Dreams were filled with firefights and extraction points, radio chatter and the smell of cordite. He would wake at 0400 hours, ready for morning PT, only to remember there was nowhere to report. The VA counselor suggested hobbies, volunteer work, maybe college courses. Marcus nodded politely and never returned. How could he explain that civilian problems felt like exercises in irrelevance when you'd spent years preventing international incidents? The narrative shifts to the bustling metropolitan area of Phoenix, where the camera focuses on Sarah Martinez, a dedicated and passionate high school teacher at Lincoln High School. Sarah was in the middle of conducting an engaging literature class, completely absorbed in helping her students understand complex themes in classic novels. Her classroom was typically a haven of learning and intellectual growth, decorated with inspirational quotes and student artwork that reflected months of careful cultivation. Sarah had been teaching for 7 years, long enough to recognize the difference between students who were genuinely struggling and those who had simply given up hope. Her classroom walls displayed years of accumulated wisdom. Student essays that had touched her heart, photographs from field trips that had opened young minds to new possibilities, thank you cards from graduates who credited her with changing their lives. She believed absolutely in the transformative power of education, even when the system seemed designed to crush that belief. Today's lesson focused on To Kill a Mockingbird, and Sarah was guiding her students through the complexities of moral courage in the face of social pressure. She watched their faces as they grappled with concepts that many of them encountered daily in their own lives. These weren't abstract literary themes to kids from this neighborhood. They were survival strategies disguised as homework assignments. What does it mean to do the right thing when everyone around you is choosing differently? Sarah asked, her voice carrying the kind of passion that had first drawn her to teaching. Several hands went up, and she felt that familiar spark of connection that made all the bureaucracy and budget cuts worthwhile. However, this peaceful academic environment was violently disrupted when pandemonium erupted throughout the school campus. The first sign was shouting from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of lockers slamming and bodies colliding with walls. Sarah's instincts kicked in immediately, honed by years of dealing with adolescent crises. She moved toward the door, already reaching for the emergency phone, when the violence exploded directly outside her classroom. A vicious and coordinated attack broke out among several students, and it quickly became apparent that this wasn't merely a spontaneous altercation. The entire incident appeared to be meticulously planned and orchestrated to target one specific vulnerable student. Marcus would later recognize the tactical precision of the assault, the way attackers moved to cut off escape routes and prevent intervention by authority figures. The victim was Jaime Chen, a quiet sophomore who had made the mistake of refusing to carry drugs for the Crimson Serpents. He was small for his age, academically gifted, and completely unprepared for the level of violence that was about to be unleashed upon him. The attackers had chosen their moment carefully, between class periods when the hallways were crowded, but supervision was minimal. Sarah and her colleague, Mr. Thompson, courageously rushed into the melee to intervene in the brutal assault. Thompson was a 30-year veteran of the education system, a man who had seen every kind of crisis and never backed down from protecting his students. Despite facing significant personal danger, they managed to separate the combatants and shield the victimized student from further harm. Sarah used her body to create a barrier between Jaime and his attackers, while Thompson's commanding voice cut through the chaos, establishing just enough order to prevent serious injury. Surprisingly, the student they had rescued insisted that he hadn't required their assistance, obviously attempting to preserve his reputation and avoid being perceived as weak or defenseless. Jaime's lip was split, his shirt torn, and his books scattered across the hallway, but he maintained the facade of independence that was essential to survival in this environment. Sarah understood the psychology behind his denial, but it broke her heart nonetheless. Following the violent incident, Sarah attempted to engage with the primary instigator of the attack, a menacing teenager named Diego Vargas. Diego was far from an ordinary troublemaker. He was the feared and ruthless leader of a criminal organization known as the Crimson Serpents. At 17, he already commanded respect through intimidation and had a reputation that extended far beyond the school grounds. His followers operated with military-like discipline, and Diego himself possessed an intelligence that made him more dangerous than typical gang leaders. With a maternal but firm approach, Sarah tried to reach out to him, speaking with genuine concern about his future prospects and encouraging him to reconsider his destructive path. She had seen potential in the most unlikely students before, and something about Diego's controlled aggression suggested capabilities that could be channeled toward positive goals if given the right guidance and opportunities. "You're smart, Diego," she said, stepping closer despite the obvious danger. "Smarter than this. You could do anything you want with your life if you made different choices." Her voice carried years of experience talking to students who had been written off by everyone else, including themselves. Diego regarded her with cold, calculating eyes, openly mocking her attempts at intervention and delivering a chilling warning for her to mind her own business. His smile was practiced and predatory, the expression of someone who had learned early that power came from others' fear. "You don't know anything about my choices, teacher lady," he said, his tone conversational but loaded with menace. "Maybe you should worry about your own safety instead of playing social worker." He then walked away with deliberate arrogance, making it crystal clear that he had absolutely no intention of heeding her advice or changing his behavior. His followers fell in behind him with the precision of a military unit, and Sarah realized she was dealing with something far more dangerous and organized than typical school violence. Still shaken but determined to take action, Sarah and Mr. Thompson immediately went to Principal Robert Hartwell to report the incident and Diego's direct threat. They urgently pressed the principal to take decisive disciplinary action against Diego and his criminal associates, especially after Sarah revealed that she had been personally threatened with violence. Thompson corroborated her account, emphasizing the organized nature of the attack and the implications for school safety. However, Principal Hartwell dismissed their legitimate concerns, claiming there was insufficient concrete evidence to justify expelling Diego from the school. His response seemed rehearsed, as if he had defended Diego's behavior before. "These incidents happen," he said dismissively. "Boys will be boys. Without witnesses willing to go on record, my hands are tied by district policy." Sarah became visibly frustrated and stormed out of the administrative office, declaring that she would gather the proof necessary to force action. Thompson followed her, both of them recognizing that something wasn't right about Hartwell's unwillingness to protect his students and staff. The rest of the school day passed in tense normalcy. Sarah tried to focus on teaching, but her mind kept returning to Diego's threat and Hartwell's dismissive attitude. She noticed things she had previously overlooked, the way certain students deferred to Crimson Serpents members, the small packages that changed hands in supposedly empty hallways, the expensive accessories worn by kids whose families struggled to afford basic necessities. When Sarah reached her vehicle in the school parking lot after classes ended, she discovered herself completely surrounded by members of the Crimson Serpents gang. Her car's door locks had been deliberately sabotaged with hardened gum, making it extremely difficult for her to gain entry. The gang members taunted and harassed her relentlessly, laughing maliciously and hurling crude insults as she struggled desperately with her keys. The parking lot was strategically chosen for this intimidation, late enough that most staff had left, but early enough that some students remained for after-school activities. The Serpents wanted witnesses to spread word of what happened to people who crossed them, but not so many that intervention was likely. Diego made an obscene gesture toward her, but Sarah refused to be intimidated or cowed by their tactics. She boldly returned the same gesture, but inverted it as a defiant act of resistance. The gesture earned appreciative laughter from some gang members, and Sarah realized that showing fear would only make things worse. Finally managing to unlock her car door, she drove away, while the gang continued shouting offensive and threatening comments behind her. Her hands shook on the steering wheel as she navigated through evening traffic. The incident in the parking lot had been carefully calculated to terrorize without crossing legal lines. No actual assault, no property damage that could be proven, just psychological warfare designed to make her reconsider her interference in gang business. Upon arriving home, Sarah was relieved and comforted to find Marcus waiting for her. She ran into his strong arms, feeling both happiness and relief at seeing him after their long separation. Marcus had been her anchor since college, the steady presence that balanced her passionate intensity with practical wisdom. His embrace felt like coming home after a dangerous journey. Marcus explained that he had been honorably discharged from his military service, though he carefully omitted the circumstances surrounding his dismissal. They spent the evening discussing their future together, wondering what career path he might pursue now that his military days were behind him. Sarah shared her experiences at school, describing the gang problems and administrative indifference without mentioning the specific threats she had received. "The kids deserve better," she said, curled against his chest on their apartment couch. "Some of them are so smart, so capable, but the system is failing them. The administration won't address the real problems, and the gangs are filling the vacuum." Marcus listened carefully, his tactical mind automatically categorizing threats and assessing security vulnerabilities. His civilian girlfriend worked in what amounted to a hostile environment, and every instinct told him that the situation was more dangerous than she realized. But he also recognized her need to feel useful, to make a difference in young lives. It was one of the qualities he most admired about her. Shortly afterward, Marcus received an intriguing voicemail from one of his former teammates, Tommy Chen. There was a potentially lucrative job opportunity that could provide substantial financial compensation for his specialized skills. The message was vague but urgent, suggesting that their unique talents were in demand in the private sector. They arranged to meet at an upscale nightclub to discuss the details of this mysterious proposition. The nightclub was the kind of place where businessmen and criminals conducted transactions under cover of loud music and dim lighting. Marcus arrived early, surveying the layout and identifying potential exits out of habit. The crowd was an interesting mix of legitimate entrepreneurs and individuals whose wealth seemed disproportionate to their apparent occupations. Tommy, one of Marcus's most trusted former teammates, urged him to seriously consider this opportunity. They introduced Marcus to the prospective client and to a competitor named Viktor Petrov. Petrov would later prove to be an extremely dangerous individual who would attempt to eliminate Marcus when their paths crossed again. Even in that first meeting, Marcus recognized something predatory in Petrov's demeanor, a casual disregard for human life that marked true sociopaths. Marcus quickly discovered that the proposed job involved providing armed security for illegal drug shipments and protecting them from rival criminal organizations and federal law enforcement interference. The pay was substantial enough to solve all of Marcus's financial problems, but the work fundamentally conflicted with his moral principles and professional ethics. He was a man of unwavering integrity who refused to participate in any illegal activities, regardless of the financial incentives offered. "You're talking about protecting poison that destroys communities," Marcus said bluntly. "I spent 23 years serving my country, not enabling the people who tear it apart from the inside." The client seemed surprised by Marcus's directness. Most military contractors were willing to overlook moral considerations for the right price. Tommy looked embarrassed, clearly hoping his recommendation would lead to easy money for both of them. Marcus declined the criminal job offer, explaining that there was a fundamental difference between a professional soldier and a mercenary killer. The distinction lay in their moral compass and willingness to cross ethical boundaries. Consequently, Petrov accepted the position instead, beginning his descent into the criminal underworld. As they left the nightclub, Tommy expressed disappointment, but understanding. "Not everyone can do this work," he admitted. "Maybe that's why you were always the best leader we had. You never forgot why we were fighting." The following morning, Sarah decided to go for her regular jog along the scenic beachfront near their home. Running was her meditation, the daily ritual that cleared her mind and prepared her for whatever challenges the day might bring. The route took her through a quiet residential area and along a bike path that paralleled the Salt River. She was completely unaware that a member of the Crimson Serpents gang was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The attack was carefully planned. Her routine was predictable, and there were several points along her route where intervention would be difficult. As she ran past his concealed position behind a maintenance shed, he suddenly emerged and launched a vicious assault, striking her knee with a metal pipe and continuing his brutal attack when she fell. The weapon was chosen specifically to cause disability without permanent visible damage, sending a message while maintaining plausible deniability. Fortunately, Marcus was exercising nearby and heard the commotion. His own workout routine included tactical movements and situational awareness drills that kept his combat skills sharp. He immediately sprinted to her location, arriving just in time to frighten off the attacker before more serious damage could be inflicted. The assailant disappeared into the neighborhood with practiced efficiency, clearly familiar with escape routes. He quickly transported Sarah to the nearest hospital emergency room for immediate medical treatment and evaluation. The emergency room was busy with typical morning casualties: construction accidents, heart attacks, domestic violence cases. Sarah's attack was just another entry in the endless catalogue of urban violence, but Marcus's military bearing and obvious concern elevated her priority among the medical staff. While recovering from her injuries, Sarah shared her strong suspicions with Marcus. She firmly believed that the attack had been carefully planned and coordinated, likely involving corrupt individuals within the school administration. The timing was too convenient, the method too professional for random violence. She pleaded with Marcus to handle her absence from school over the next several days and requested that he make the necessary phone calls to cover her responsibilities. "They wanted to send a message," she said through gritted teeth as the doctor examined her injured knee. "This wasn't random. They're trying to silence me, and I'm afraid they might go after my students next." Witnessing how deeply hurt and terrified she was, Marcus made a solemn promise that he would not allow anything further to happen to her. He vowed that whoever was responsible for this cowardly attack would face severe consequences for their actions. After ensuring she was comfortable and safe, he left her to rest and began developing a plan to go undercover as a substitute teacher in her place. The plan required considerable preparation. Marcus contacted his former teammates, explaining the situation and requesting their assistance. Most were eager to help, partly out of loyalty to Marcus, but also because civilian law enforcement seemed incapable of addressing the problem. Jackson volunteered to handle technical surveillance, while Chen offered medical support and Thompson provided intelligence gathering. Marcus was determined to identify those responsible for the attack and bring them to justice through whatever means necessary. He and his former tactical team devised an elaborate plan to infiltrate the school system. To conceal his true identity and his personal connection to Sarah, he adopted the alias of David Wilson. The false identity was carefully constructed with military precision. Fake references, fabricated employment history, even a manufactured social media presence that would survive casual investigation. Using this false identity, he submitted a job application to the school district and was promptly invited for an interview. The bureaucratic process was surprisingly easy. suggesting that the district was either desperate for qualified teachers or dangerously careless about background checks. Marcus suspected both conditions were true. During the interview process, Principal Hartwell appeared friendly and welcoming on the surface. He informed Mr. Wilson that he would be placed on a probationary period for evaluation purposes, standard procedure for substitute teachers. Wilson assured the principal that he would perform his duties to the best of his abilities as Sarah's temporary replacement. Ms. Martinez is well liked by the students, Hartwell said, studying Wilson's resume with apparent interest. She has high standards, perhaps too high for some of our more challenging pupils. I hope you'll find a way to maintain order without creating unnecessary conflicts. Although he maintained a calm and professional demeanor throughout the interview, Wilson was focused entirely on his hidden mission: to identify and expose the individuals responsible for Sarah's attack and uncover any corruption within the school's administration. Every question, every casual comment was analyzed for intelligence value. The school building itself told a story of institutional neglect. Paint peeled from hallway walls, fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, and the floors showed years of deferred maintenance. But Marcus also noticed more subtle signs: security cameras that had been strategically disabled, areas where sightlines were blocked by convenient obstacles, and a general atmosphere of resigned acceptance among the staff. On his first day of teaching, Wilson entered a classroom filled with disrespectful and completely chaotic students. The room was noisy and utterly disorganized, but Wilson didn't allow the disorder to rattle his composure. He had commanded troops in active combat zones. A room full of teenagers presented no particular challenge to his leadership abilities. He calmly walked to the front of the classroom and began taking attendance, carefully observing each student's behavior and attitude. His military bearing was subtle but unmistakable: straight posture, controlled movements, eyes that missed nothing. Several students recognized something different about this substitute teacher, though they couldn't articulate what made him seem more dangerous than their usual academic targets. As he studied the students' interactions, he began to comprehend the severity of the problems plaguing the school. Many students showed complete disregard for education, and disciplinary measures were practically non-existent throughout the institution. The Crimson Serpents operated with impunity, their members clearly identified by subtle gang indicators that most teachers either ignored or failed to recognize. Later in the faculty break room, Wilson reconnected with Mr. Thompson and was introduced to the school librarian, Emma Collins. During their conversation, Thompson explained how dangerous and influential the Crimson Serpents gang had become within the school environment. The gang had established control through intimidation, fear, and violence, creating a parallel power structure that operated independently of official authority. "They've been getting bolder," Thompson explained over institutional coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Carter administration. Used to keep their business off campus, but now they're recruiting openly, dealing in the bathrooms, settling scores in the hallways. Administration knows what's happening but won't act. Emma added her suspicion that the gang might be directly responsible for Sarah's attack. She even hinted that Principal Hartwell might be collaborating with the criminal organization, though Thompson defended Hartwell's reputation, mentioning that he was a former police officer who wouldn't engage in such corrupt activities. "Robert's a good man," Thompson insisted. "Tough job. Limited resources, impossible expectations from the district. Sometimes compromise is the only way to maintain any semblance of order." Despite Thompson's defense of the principal, Wilson became increasingly suspicious of Hartwell's true motivations and loyalties. The man's responses during their interview had been too smooth, too practiced. His explanations for the school's problems focused on external factors while avoiding any discussion of internal accountability. During a private meeting with the principal, Wilson noticed several unusual details that didn't align with a typical educator's lifestyle. Most notably, Hartwell was wearing an expensive gold watch that seemed far beyond the financial reach of a public school administrator's salary. The timepiece was a Rolex Submariner, retail value approximately $15,000, hardly the accessory of choice for someone earning a public educator's wages. Their conversation became a subtle psychological battle, with each man carefully testing the other's knowledge and intentions. They exchanged calculated comments designed to gauge reactions and reveal hidden information. Wilson commented on Hartwell's apparent confidence in wearing such valuable jewelry in a supposedly dangerous school environment. "Nice watch," Wilson observed casually. "Must feel secure wearing something like that in this neighborhood." Hartwell responded by demonstrating his method of maintaining control over the student population, suggesting that power and intimidation were more effective tools than justice and fairness. "Respect has to be earned," he said, unconsciously adjusting the expensive timepiece. "Sometimes that requires showing strength rather than weakness." This philosophy only deepened Wilson's suspicions about the principal's true character and possible criminal connections. No legitimate educator should speak about students as adversaries to be dominated, rather than young people to be guided and protected. That evening, Wilson reconnected with his former military team and outlined a comprehensive surveillance plan. They would secretly install hidden cameras throughout the school to monitor the movements and activities of Crimson Serpent's members, gathering concrete evidence of their criminal operations. The technical requirements were significant: covert installation, encrypted transmission, remote monitoring capabilities, and evidence quality recording. Some team members initially expressed reservations about the plan, citing legal concerns and the possibility of civilian casualties if their operation was discovered. But eventually, most agreed to participate in the covert operation, recognizing that conventional law enforcement had failed to address the problem. Jackson, their electronics specialist, spent hours studying the school's layout and identifying optimal surveillance positions. "Security's a joke," he reported. "Half the existing cameras don't work, and the ones that do aren't monitored consistently. We can piggyback on their system, and they'll never know we're there." The following day in class, Wilson began a lesson about military strategy and tactics, hoping to gauge student reactions and identify gang sympathizers. As he turned his back to write on the blackboard, a student named Kyle threw a crushed aluminum can at his head, testing the new teacher's responses and attempting to establish dominance through disrespect. With lightning-fast reflexes developed through years of combat training, Wilson caught the projectile in midair and immediately threw it back, striking Kyle directly in the forehead. The students were shocked and stunned by this display of speed and precision. None of their previous teachers had demonstrated such physical capabilities or tactical awareness. Kyle stood up, ready to fight with his classmates, cheering him on aggressively. The challenge had to be met. Backing down would destroy Wilson's authority and invite escalating confrontations. However, Wilson easily defended himself using non-lethal restraint techniques. He twisted Kyle's arm and pinned him to the floor without using excessive force or causing serious injury, demonstrating complete control over the situation. "Aggressive behavior has consequences," Wilson said calmly, maintaining his grip until Kyle stopped struggling. "In the real world, disrespect can get you killed. Consider this an educational opportunity." Wilson then approached another student named Miguel, whom he had observed carrying a sharpened metal implement concealed in his jacket. He calmly requested that Miguel surrender the weapon, his tone suggesting that compliance was strongly recommended rather than optional. When Miguel refused to comply, Wilson grabbed his wrist and applied precise pressure to a nerve point, causing him to immediately drop the dangerous object. The technique was painful, but caused no permanent damage, a lesson in consequences that Miguel would remember clearly. This decisive action sent a clear message to the entire class that Wilson was not a typical substitute teacher who could be easily intimidated or manipulated. From that moment forward, the classroom became completely silent and respectful. Students sat straighter, paid attention to instructions, and began to realize that their usual tactics would be ineffective against this particular authority figure. Wilson took complete control of the learning environment and began delivering an engaging lesson, gradually earning the students' respect through his combination of strength and knowledge. He demonstrated that discipline and education could coexist, that learning was possible even in hostile environments if the right leadership was provided. Kyle and Miguel later visited the school nurse and reported the incident to Principal Hartwell, claiming that the new substitute teacher had assaulted them without provocation. Their accounts were dramatic and detailed, designed to generate maximum outrage and administrative response. Hartwell quickly dispatched the school security guard, Frank, to Wilson's classroom to investigate the situation and potentially remove the problematic teacher. Frank was a former military policeman who recognized authority when he saw it, even if he couldn't quite identify what made Wilson different from typical educators. However, when Frank arrived, he discovered something completely unexpected. The classroom was peaceful and orderly, with students sitting attentively and actively participating in the lesson. The contrast to the reported chaos was so dramatic that Frank initially wondered if he had entered the wrong room. Frank was confused by this stark contrast to the reported chaos and returned to Hartwell with his surprising observations. "Never seen anything like it," he reported. "Kids are actually taking notes. Nobody's talking back or causing trouble. Whatever he did, it worked." Surprised by this positive development, Hartwell decided to postpone any disciplinary action and wait to see how the situation would develop. The principal was clearly conflicted between maintaining his relationship with the Crimson Serpents and avoiding district scrutiny that would come with additional violence on campus. As the class session continued, Diego Vargas, the leader of the Crimson Serpents, attempted to intimidate Wilson by asking if he had ever been shot in combat. The question was designed to unnerve him and test whether this new teacher had any real experience with violence or was just projecting false confidence. "Have you ever been shot, teacher?" Diego asked with calculated insolence. "You talk like you know about fighting, but have you ever bled for real?" Wilson regarded Diego with steady eyes, recognizing the psychological probing for what it was. "Violence is a tool," he replied calmly. "Like any tool, it's only effective when used properly and for the right reasons. The question isn't whether I've been shot. The question is whether you're prepared for what happens when you cross certain lines." The exchange was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who understood the language of intimidation. Diego realized he was dealing with someone far more dangerous than typical school personnel, while Wilson confirmed that the gang leader possessed intelligence that made him a serious threat. Later that day, Wilson monitored the school through the hidden surveillance cameras that had been installed by his teammate Jackson. The technology was military-grade, providing high-definition coverage of key areas where gang activity was most likely to occur. While watching the monitors carefully, he observed Principal Hartwell walking purposefully toward his classroom with obvious hostile intentions. Reacting quickly, Wilson arranged everything to appear completely normal and professional. He dismissed the class early, ensured that all evidence of his surveillance activities was concealed, and prepared for confrontation. When Hartwell entered the classroom, he immediately raised a serious concern about potential lawsuits being filed by students' parents. "I've received complaints about your teaching methods," Hartwell said, his tone carefully controlled but edged with threat. "Parents are concerned about physical contact with their children. The district takes these allegations very seriously." Hartwell demanded that Wilson issue public apologies to avoid termination, clearly expecting compliance and submission from someone he viewed as a temporary employee with no institutional protection or legal resources. However, Wilson was well versed in employment law and legal procedures, knowledge gained through years of dealing with military bureaucracy and contractor negotiations. He pointed out that he couldn't be fired without following proper termination protocols, including a mandatory 2-week notice period. His firm legal stance unsettled Hartwell, who hadn't expected such knowledgeable resistance from a substitute teacher. "You seem surprisingly familiar with employment law for an educator," Hartwell observed suspiciously. "Most teachers don't know their rights so thoroughly." Wilson smiled without warmth. "I believe in being prepared for all possibilities. Education extends beyond classroom subjects to include practical life skills, like understanding legal protections." Growing increasingly suspicious of Wilson's confidence and legal knowledge, Hartwell ordered a comprehensive background investigation into his credentials and employment history. However, the investigation only revealed the carefully crafted false documents and fabricated records that Wilson and his team had strategically planted as part of their deep cover operation. The background check appeared thorough and legitimate, confirming David Wilson's credentials as a certified educator with several years of experience in various districts. References checked out, employment history was consistent, and even his college transcripts had been meticulously forged by specialists who understood how institutions verified credentials. Later that evening, Wilson drove Sarah home from her medical appointments, helping her navigate on crutches while her injured knee healed. The attack had left her physically vulnerable, but spiritually strengthened, more determined than ever to protect her students from the criminal influences that were destroying their educational opportunities. As she entered their house, she discovered a heartfelt letter from several of her students, expressing their gratitude for her dedication and concern for their well-being. The letter was handwritten, obviously collaborative, and signed by more than a dozen students who had been touched by her genuine care for their futures. "We know you got hurt because you tried to help us," the letter read. "Most teachers don't care what happens to kids like us, but you do. We hope you get better soon and come back. School isn't the same without you." Touched by this unexpected gesture of appreciation, Sarah began to cry emotionally, overwhelmed by the realization that her efforts were making a difference, despite the dangerous opposition she faced. Wilson attempted to comfort her, but their heightened emotions led to a minor argument about the risks he was taking. Sarah understood that Marcus was putting himself in danger on her behalf, and the weight of that responsibility troubled her deeply. "I never wanted you to become a target too," she said through tears. "These people are dangerous, and if they figure out who you really are..." Despite their temporary disagreement, both clearly cared deeply about each other and remained committed to their shared mission of protecting the students and exposing the corruption that was destroying the school from within. The next morning, Wilson returned to the classroom, prepared to continue teaching and gathering intelligence. Diego Vargas and his group of criminal associates swaggered into the room significantly late, obviously attempting to provoke a confrontation and test Wilson's resolve. Wilson addressed Diego's tardiness with calm authority, assigning him additional academic work as a consequence for his disrespect. The punishment was reasonable but firm, designed to establish boundaries without creating unnecessary escalation. Diego sarcastically asked if he should write an apology on the blackboard 10 times, his tone dripping with contempt and barely concealed challenge. The question was clearly intended to mock both the punishment and Wilson's authority. Wilson escalated the punishment, demanding that he write it 100 times instead, demonstrating that disrespect would result in increased consequences rather than negotiation or compromise. Realizing he couldn't openly defy the teacher without facing more severe consequences, Diego agreed, but not before issuing a veiled threat. "You're making this personal, teacher," Diego said quietly. "That's a mistake people don't usually get to make twice." Refusing to be intimidated, Wilson shifted the classroom dynamic by initiating a deep and meaningful discussion about the students' futures, goals, and the long-term consequences of their current life choices. His questions were pointed but not judgmental, designed to force honest self-reflection. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" he asked the class. "Not where you think you should be, but where you're actually headed based on the choices you're making right now." Slowly, the students began to engage genuinely, their defensive attitudes gradually fading as they realized Wilson was genuinely trying to help them envision possibilities beyond their current circumstances. Several students shared dreams they had never voiced before: college aspirations, career goals, hopes for families and stability. The discussion became emotionally powerful and enlightening, forcing the students to confront harsh realities about their situations while also providing hope that different futures were possible with different choices. After the lesson concluded, Hartwell unexpectedly appeared again, this time complimenting Wilson on his effective handling of Diego's disruptive behavior. The principal's tone was carefully neutral, but Wilson detected genuine surprise at the positive classroom atmosphere. "I have to admit, I'm impressed," Hartwell said, studying the orderly classroom with apparent bewilderment. "Most substitutes can't maintain any control over these students. You seem to have found an effective approach." Hartwell appeared genuinely impressed that Wilson had maintained classroom control without resorting to violence or excessive disciplinary measures that would attract district attention. He invited Wilson to meet with him privately later that day to discuss his teaching methods and philosophy, supposedly for evaluation purposes. Unknown to Wilson, however, Hartwell had entirely different plans. That same day, he secretly arranged a meeting with Diego Vargas to organize a violent assault on Wilson. They believed it was time to eliminate him permanently before he could uncover more of their criminal operations or inspire other faculty members to challenge their authority. The meeting took place in Hartwell's office after hours, when the building was empty, except for maintenance staff who had been carefully selected for their discretion and financial dependence on gang operations. "This teacher is becoming a problem," Hartwell explained to Diego. "He's asking too many questions, getting too much respect from the students. That kind of influence threatens our arrangement." Diego nodded understanding. Wilson's effectiveness in the classroom was undermining the gang's control over student behavior, and his obvious competence suggested capabilities that could prove dangerous if directed against their operations. Fortunately, Wilson was already anticipating such a move. He had been monitoring their secret meeting through the surveillance cameras and began preparing accordingly. His military training had taught him to always expect escalation when dealing with cornered adversaries. As darkness fell, Wilson equipped himself with protective gear, including a bulletproof vest, and chose a strategic defensive position in the school library. The location offered multiple escape routes, cover from gunfire, and weapons of opportunity if the situation deteriorated into close combat. Diego and a group of armed criminals hired by Hartwell burst into the library, initiating a violent confrontation that transformed the peaceful academic space into a battlefield. Wilson fought back with deadly efficiency, utilizing his advanced military combat training to systematically defeat the attackers. The first attacker came through the main entrance, expecting to surprise an unarmed teacher. Instead, he encountered a tactical professional who had been anticipating the assault. Wilson used a combination of furniture and improvised weapons to neutralize the threat without permanent injury, though his restraint was motivated by legal concerns rather than mercy. One by one, he systematically defeated the attackers, overpowering them and throwing their unconscious bodies through the library windows onto the concrete below. The defenestration served multiple purposes, removing threats from the immediate area, creating psychological pressure on remaining attackers, and providing evidence of the assault for any future legal proceedings. Just as Wilson was about to deal with Diego, one of the gang members recovered his weapon and fired directly at Wilson. Fortunately, his bulletproof vest absorbed the impact, though the kinetic energy was enough to knock him down temporarily. Diego ordered the shooter to kill the librarian Emma Collins to eliminate potential witnesses, demonstrating the casual brutality that characterized gang operations. Emma had remained hidden behind the circulation desk, but her position was discovered when she inadvertently knocked over a stack of books while trying to reach the emergency phone. However, when the attackers thought they had successfully killed Wilson and moved toward Emma, Wilson revealed that he was very much alive and functional. He threw the gunman through the window onto his accomplices below, leaving Diego shocked and bewildered by Wilson's apparent invincibility. The confrontation lasted less than 10 minutes, but left the library completely destroyed. Books were scattered across the floor, furniture was overturned and broken, and several windows had been shattered by falling bodies. The damage would require extensive repair and explanation to district administrators. Later, Hartwell was leaving the building when he encountered Wilson, who appeared calm and completely unruffled by the recent violence. Surprised and confused by Wilson's survival, Hartwell attempted to cover his shock and maintain his innocent facade. "Working late tonight?" Hartwell asked, trying to sound casual while studying Wilson for signs of injury or distress. Wilson played along with the deception, pretending nothing unusual had occurred and casually asking Hartwell about their scheduled meeting. His demeanor was so normal that Hartwell began to doubt whether the assault had actually taken place. Caught completely off guard, Hartwell mumbled that it was too late for their discussion, and the two parted ways without revealing the truth about the attempted assassination. Both men understood that a psychological warfare campaign had begun, but neither was ready to abandon their respective covers. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson visited Sarah at home to provide comfort and emotional support during her recovery. During their lengthy conversation, Thompson began connecting various pieces of information he had observed about Wilson's unusual behavior and capabilities. "There's something different about your substitute," Thompson said carefully. "The way he carries himself, how he handled those students, his knowledge of legal procedures. It's almost like he has military experience." Based on his knowledge of the situation and Wilson's unusual behavior, he started to suspect that Wilson might actually be Marcus Kane, Sarah's husband and former Special Forces operative. The timing of Wilson's arrival, his obvious competence, and Sarah's vague explanations about Marcus's current activities all suggested a connection that Thompson was beginning to understand. Elsewhere, Marcus's teammate Tommy continued monitoring the gang's activities and movements through electronic surveillance and physical observation. He followed Diego Vargas through the city, documenting meeting locations, associates, and operational patterns that could be used to predict future criminal activities. Tommy's surveillance revealed the scope of the Crimson Serpent's operations, which extended far beyond school grounds to include drug distribution, protection rackets, and violent enforcement services for other criminal organizations. The gang was a significant criminal enterprise disguised as juvenile delinquency. That evening, Marcus returned home to find Sarah emotionally distraught and confrontational. She had discovered his true identity and understood his real purpose at the school through Thompson's careful observations and her own deductive reasoning. "I know what you're doing," she said as soon as he walked through the door. "I know you're not really David Wilson, and I know why you're at the school. Thompson figured it out, and he's worried about what happens when they realize who you are." She revealed that she had learned everything from Thompson's careful observations and deductions, combined with her own knowledge of Marcus's capabilities and motivations. Marcus didn't attempt to deny the truth. Instead, he opened up completely about his suspicions regarding Hartwell's collaboration with the Crimson Serpents and his determination to dismantle their criminal network to protect innocent students and restore safety to the school environment. "These people hurt you," he said simply. "They're destroying kids' futures for profit. Law enforcement won't act. Administration is compromised, and the students are caught in the middle. Someone has to take responsibility." The surveillance team continued monitoring the gang's operations intensively, building comprehensive profiles of criminal activities and identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited to disrupt their operations. One day, Tommy contacted Marcus with urgent information about a major drug transaction scheduled to occur near the industrial port district. The intelligence was specific: time, location, participants, and estimated value of the narcotics being transferred. Marcus arrived at the location, and together they observed the Crimson Serpents negotiating with international drug buyers in a carefully choreographed exchange. The operation involved multiple vehicles, sophisticated communication equipment, and security measures that indicated significant criminal investment. Once they confirmed the illegal transaction was proceeding, Marcus and Tommy launched a coordinated surprise attack on both groups. Marcus focused his assault on the gang members, while Tommy handled the buyers attempting to escape by boat. Their tactical approach was designed to create maximum confusion while minimizing the possibility of escape. During the chaotic battle, one of Marcus's former teammates, Ryan Holland, who had previously disagreed with their vigilante mission, ordered another team member named Bruce to eliminate Marcus. Holland believed that their unauthorized operations were crossing legal and ethical boundaries that would ultimately destroy them all. "This has gone too far," Holland said over their radio frequency. "We're not soldiers anymore. We're criminals, and Marcus is leading us all down a path that ends in prison or death." A brutal hand-to-hand fight erupted between Bruce and Marcus, with both men exchanging devastating blows in a confrontation that tested years of shared training and mutual respect. The fight was emotionally devastating for both participants, as they had been brothers in arms who had saved each other's lives multiple times. Eventually, Marcus managed to knock Bruce unconscious through superior training and determination, though the victory was hollow and painful. Witnessing Marcus's unwavering commitment to justice, the opposing teammate reconsidered his position and decided to support the mission. Together, they defeated Bruce, seized the substantial drug money, and disposed of the illegal narcotics by dumping them into the ocean. The drugs dissolved in the salt water, eliminating evidence while ensuring they could never reach their intended destinations. The financial impact was significant: several $100,000 in cash, plus drugs, with a street value exceeding $2 million. The loss would create serious problems for the criminal organizations involved and potentially destabilize their operations for months. The next morning, Hartwell watched a news report about the drug bust with growing anxiety. The reporter described a coordinated assault on criminal operations that resulted in significant arrests and substantial seizures of contraband. While processing the implications of this development, he received a threatening phone call from the international drug lord, who was furious about the significant financial losses. "You promised security," the voice said in accented English. "Your people were supposed to protect the shipment. Now my money is gone, my product is destroyed, and my buyers are in police custody." The drug lord demanded immediate repayment for the seized money and destroyed product, threatening violent consequences if the debt was not satisfied quickly. In a state of panic, Hartwell rushed to the school and confronted Diego about the failed operation. During their heated conversation, he realized that Wilson was responsible for orchestrating the entire operation, though he couldn't prove the connection without revealing his own criminal involvement. Wilson didn't attempt to hide his involvement when confronted. He confidently announced that the money recovered from the drug bust had been used to purchase improved educational facilities and provide free meals for deserving students. The irony was deliberate, criminal profits redirected toward legitimate educational purposes. While he was making this positive announcement, Hartwell rushed toward him and immediately terminated his employment, claiming that Wilson's methods were incompatible with district policies and that his continued presence represented a liability to the school. However, Wilson's heroic actions had earned him widespread admiration and support from other faculty members, students, and Mr. Thompson, who now fully endorsed Wilson's mission to clean up the school. Thompson offered to provide more direct assistance, recognizing that conventional approaches had failed completely. Wilson warned him to exercise extreme caution, especially since Hartwell might be working directly with criminal elements who would not hesitate to eliminate threats through violence. Thompson wanted to maintain faith in Hartwell's innocence, but his judgment was compromised by personal loyalty and misplaced trust. Later that night, Marcus once again became the target of a violent assassination attempt. The gang members connected to the Crimson Serpents, along with their corrupt administrative allies, were growing increasingly desperate to eliminate him because his undercover investigation was systematically exposing their extensive criminal operations. The assault was more sophisticated than previous attempts, involving multiple vehicles, automatic weapons, and tactical coordination that suggested professional criminal involvement. In the darkness, Marcus narrowly escaped a carefully planned ambush, though his survival required all of his combat experience and tactical knowledge. Gunshots rang out through the night, and Marcus's vehicle was riddled with bullets and crashed into a nearby building. However, his advanced military training and lightning-fast reflexes enabled him to avoid serious injury or death by abandoning the vehicle before the attackers could confirm their target. Simultaneously, Mr. Thompson, who had been supporting Wilson's mission and working against the gang's influence, became entangled in dangerous criminal activities. In the school's basement, Thompson attempted to gather concrete evidence of the gang's illegal drug operations and their corrupting influence over the educational institution. He had discovered a sophisticated distribution network operating from the school's storage areas, using legitimate educational supplies as cover for narcotic trafficking. The evidence was overwhelming and would have been sufficient to trigger federal investigations if presented to the proper authorities. Unfortunately, he was discovered and ambushed by Diego and Carlos, key criminals deeply involved in the drug trafficking network. Tragically, Thompson was brutally murdered during this confrontation, and Principal Hartwell was the one who personally carried out the execution with a single gunshot to the head. Thompson's death was sudden and shocking, devastating everyone who knew and respected him. The murder was particularly brutal because Thompson had genuinely believed in Hartwell's integrity and had defended him even when evidence suggested corruption. Fortunately, a student witnessed the killing and later provided crucial testimony to Marcus and law enforcement authorities about what they had observed. The witness was Jaime, the same student who had been victimized in the initial gang assault that had begun Sarah's involvement in the situation. The next morning, news of Thompson's death spread rapidly throughout the school and surrounding community. Hartwell, continuing his role as the corrupt principal, secretly collaborating with the Crimson Serpents, had already begun spreading false rumors that Marcus had also been killed during the previous night's attack. Many teachers and students mourned his supposed death, fearing that the school's future was now hopeless without his protection and advocacy. The psychological impact was devastating, as Wilson had become a symbol of hope and resistance for people who had felt powerless against criminal intimidation. However, to everyone's complete shock and amazement, Marcus appeared at the school very much alive and determined to continue his mission. His unexpected survival caused confusion and terror among those involved in the gang's criminal operations. Marcus's continued existence was clear evidence that the corrupt forces would not achieve victory easily or without significant resistance. His survival also suggested capabilities and resources that had been underestimated by his adversaries. With tensions reaching their absolute peak, Marcus confronted Mr. Dawson, another faculty member who had been secretly supporting the drug-dealing operations run by the Crimson Serpents. Marcus challenged Dawson about his betrayal and direct involvement with the gang's criminal enterprises. "You took money to look the other way while children were poisoned," Marcus said with quiet intensity. "You enabled the destruction of everything Thompson believed in. How do you justify that to yourself?" The confrontation was intense and revealing, exposing the extensive depth of corruption that had infiltrated the school's administrative leadership. Dawson's involvement included providing information about security procedures, identifying potential threats to gang operations, and facilitating drug distribution through manipulation of official schedules. Meanwhile, the Crimson Serpents retaliated by launching a coordinated violent attack on Sarah's home, escalating the conflict beyond professional boundaries into personal warfare. The gang members broke windows, shouted threatening messages, and attempted to terrorize Sarah into submission. The attack was psychological as much as physical, designed to demonstrate that Marcus's loved ones were vulnerable regardless of his military capabilities. The message was clear: continued interference would result in escalating violence against civilian targets. The student who had witnessed Thompson's murder was desperately searching for Marcus to report what they had seen, so they visited his home, along with a classmate. Jaime was determined to ensure that Thompson's killer faced justice, even though providing testimony would make him a target for gang retaliation. However, Diego also tracked them to the house and took them hostage, binding their mouths with tape while waiting for Marcus's arrival. The gang leader understood that the witness represented an existential threat to their operations and Hartwell's position. Marcus arrived just in time to attempt a rescue, but the gang members initially didn't realize he was the same person as their teacher, Wilson. The deception allowed him initial access to the house, but after his first attacks, he was temporarily overpowered by superior numbers. Unable to immediately help or escape the dangerous situation, Marcus found himself at a severe disadvantage. Diego's tactical planning had anticipated most contingencies, and the gang leader was prepared to eliminate all witnesses to protect their criminal enterprise. Diego made a phone call to his criminal superiors to inform them that Marcus Kane and David Wilson were the same person. Upon receiving this crucial information, the crime boss ordered Diego to eliminate Marcus permanently, recognizing that his continued survival represented an unacceptable threat to their operations. This violent retaliation demonstrated how far the criminal organization was willing to go to maintain their control and silence anyone who dared to oppose their illegal operations. The escalation confirmed Marcus's assessment that negotiation or compromise were impossible with adversaries who viewed murder as a routine business practice. Just before Diego was about to execute Marcus, he heard the doorbell ring and ordered Sarah to answer it, using her as a human shield while maintaining control over the hostages. It was Sarah's concerned landlady checking on the disturbance after hearing gunshots and shouting from the neighboring apartment. While Sarah convinced her to leave without suspecting anything was wrong, Marcus used this critical distraction to stab one of his captors in the leg with a concealed knife that had been overlooked during his initial capture. The blade was a military combat knife that he carried for exactly such emergencies. He managed to neutralize most of the attackers using his superior combat skills, systematically eliminating threats while protecting the civilian hostages. However, he was unable to rescue Sarah from Diego's grasp because the gang leader was using her as a human shield. Chaos erupted throughout the house, and Diego placed his weapon directly against Sarah's head, demanding that Marcus surrender his weapon if he wanted to save her life. The standoff was psychological as much as tactical, testing Marcus's priorities and resolve. With no other viable options, Marcus reluctantly complied with the demand and dropped his weapon, choosing Sarah's immediate safety over tactical advantage. However, at the crucial moment, the student hostage managed to kick Diego's gun away from Sarah's head, disarming him and creating an opportunity for Marcus to regain control of the situation. Jaime Chen's intervention was brave and decisive, demonstrating the kind of courage that Thompson had tried to instill in his students. The action also proved that young people could choose to resist criminal intimidation when provided with appropriate leadership and support. With the immediate threat neutralized, Marcus shifted his attention to the ultimate source of corruption: Principal Robert Hartwell. The story builds toward an explosive final confrontation back at the school, where Marcus and his remaining allies prepare to face the Crimson Serpents in a desperate last stand to reclaim the educational institution. The preparation for the final battle required careful coordination between Marcus's remaining team members and law enforcement authorities, who had finally been convinced of the corruption's extent. Evidence gathered through surveillance and witness testimony provided legal justification for the operation. The battle was intense and chaotic, with classrooms being destroyed, desks overturned, and the once peaceful learning environment transformed into a violent war zone. Several lives were lost or seriously injured during this brutal conflict, highlighting the dangerous consequences of allowing criminal organizations to infiltrate educational institutions. The fighting moved through multiple areas of the school. Hallways became shooting galleries, the gymnasium hosted hand-to-hand combat, and the cafeteria became a staging area for tactical operations. Despite the widespread destruction and carnage, Marcus and his team fought with unwavering determination and professional skill. They worked together systematically to dismantle the gang's stranglehold on the school, eliminating key members and exposing the full extent of their criminal network. The operation required coordination between multiple assault teams and careful attention to civilian safety. Several members of Marcus's team also perished during the final battle. One was shot in the head by enemy fire while attempting to clear a barricaded classroom, and another sacrificed himself by detonating explosives to eliminate a group of heavily armed criminals who had them pinned down in a hopeless situation. The violence continued relentlessly, but at a critical moment, Hartwell emerged from his hiding place and shot Ryan Holland in the back while he was engaging other targets. He and his remaining criminal associates then concealed themselves, waiting for Marcus to appear so they could eliminate him once and for all. Marcus was extremely cautious when he finally entered the area. He turned off all the lights before exposing himself, using darkness as tactical advantage and forcing his enemies to reveal their positions through muzzle flashes and movement sounds. A fierce hand-to-hand battle erupted between Marcus and Hartwell, with the corrupt principal appearing desperate and increasingly unhinged, while Marcus delivered precise, tactical strikes designed to disable rather than kill. The principal's police training was evident, but years of administrative softness had degraded his combat capabilities. One of Hartwell's men managed to shoot Marcus in the shoulder, but the wounded shooter was immediately killed by Holland, who was barely alive and using his last breath to protect his teammate and friend. Holland's final act was one of heroic sacrifice, ensuring that Marcus could complete their mission. Now that only the two primary adversaries remained standing, their final confrontation began in earnest. The brutal hand-to-hand combat continued for several minutes, with both men exchanging devastating blows and utilizing every technique in their respective arsenals. Hartwell fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, while Marcus maintained the disciplined precision of a professional warrior. The outcome was never really in doubt, but Hartwell's knowledge of the school's layout and hidden weapons caches prolonged the conflict. After an extended and exhausting struggle, Hartwell managed to retrieve a weapon and pointed it directly at Marcus, demanding to know his true motivation for this crusade. If it wasn't for money, what was driving him to such lengths? "Why?" Hartwell gasped, blood streaming from multiple injuries. "What makes you think you can change anything? The system is broken, the kids don't care, and nobody wants to do what's necessary to maintain order." Marcus looked him directly in the eyes and replied with conviction, "Some principles cannot be compromised, and some things are worth fighting for regardless of personal cost. These children deserve better than to be sacrificed for your criminal profits." He then delivered the final decisive blow that ended Hartwell's life and criminal career permanently. The corrupt principal's death marked the end of the Crimson Serpent's institutional protection and the beginning of genuine reform efforts. Finally, Marcus emerged from the devastated school building and found Tommy injured but alive in the aftermath of the battle. At the conclusion of this violent chapter, only Marcus and his loyal teammate Tommy remained standing after the fierce confrontation. Tommy's injuries were serious, but not fatal, requiring immediate medical attention, but allowing for full recovery with proper treatment. His survival meant that Marcus wouldn't bear the psychological burden of losing his entire team during the operation. With the criminal gang finally broken and the corrupt leadership eliminated, the school could begin the long process of recovery and rehabilitation. The students and remaining faculty members would gradually regain control of their educational environment, slowly transforming it back into a place of safety, learning, and hope for the future. The community had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of vigilance against corruption and the courage required to stand up for what is morally right, even when facing overwhelming odds and personal danger. Marcus and Sarah's sacrifice had provided a foundation for genuine positive change, demonstrating that individual action could make a difference when institutional solutions failed. In the weeks that followed, federal investigators arrived to conduct comprehensive investigations into the corruption that had been exposed. The evidence gathered by Marcus's team proved invaluable in building cases against surviving criminals and identifying other schools that might be facing similar problems. Sarah returned to teaching with renewed determination and institutional support for her efforts to help students build better futures. The violent resolution had been traumatic for everyone involved, but it had also demonstrated that criminal intimidation could be defeated when good people chose to act with courage and determination. Marcus found new purpose in helping other communities facing similar challenges, using his unique skills and experience to protect innocent people from those who would exploit their vulnerability for criminal profit. The mission would continue, but now it had legal support and institutional backing that made genuine progress possible.